All right. And Matt should be joining us at any moment. Mm-hmm. Oh man, we're so not getting monetized now. You got to wait like at least a couple minutes before you drop the F bomb on it. Oh no. I think it's fine. Yeah, oh the fuck ups. Yeah, actually I have a whole like big one that I think I'd like to go through. Another one that Audra would want to be here for. We talked a little bit about the kombucha co-op. There's a whole lot of lessons to be learned from that. Matt is here and we're live, Matt, already. So
Hey.
hope you got your game face on. Your volume is a little bit low. Your mic is quiet as normal.
Oh, not funny. How's that?
There you
A little
go.
better?
That's better. Yeah, yeah. Love the overalls.
Yeah, sorry, I just didn't get a chance to
Oh no, that's great. It
change
gives
after
us,
work.
gives us some street cred or maybe a field cred, actually. um, yeah, well, how was working out in the sticks or not
It
in the
was
sticks
good
on the
today.
farm?
It was good today. Today was it's all harvest. It was all harvesting, so lots of
Fun.
radish and radishes and turnips primarily. Um, yeah. Nice thing about today was that the just because I've been working there, for some time, I getting more involved in kind of the logistics of it.
Hmm.
So not just pulling them out of the ground, but also thinking about how do they get bundled, how do they get washed, how do they get organized and labeled, and where do they get stored, and all that kind of process stuff, which is kind of fun.
Yeah,
I mean, I enjoy that stuff.
nice. Oh, well, we're just engaging in some small talk while we wait for our sound check guy to join us.
Oh, here
Oh,
we go.
well, he is joining us on the call, which is unusual. I don't know if he is
How are you
aware of that.
doing, Chris? By the way.
Rather than, Mhm. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Well, always happy to have an unexpected guest. And I believe that was it was an article in Shareable, I think, right, about the battery collective, the People Power Battery Collective. We posted it, but credit where it's due. We did steal it from them or make use of the Creative Commons license to spread it around some more. Yeah, Colin, you want to talk about this? You want to tell us about what you're interested in and doing, or you had questions about the article? Yeah, sure. Um, so our the big exciting news for this week was publishing Chapter 6 of Cooperative Enterprise and Market Economy by Louis Razeto, translated by our own Mr. Matt Noyes. And this chapter I found especially interesting because he goes about, well, he talks about a number of different things in this. And actually, what I think we're going to discuss mostly is kind of comes actually towards the end of the chapter. But one of the things he talks about is how to a worker cooperative, an enterprise that's organized around labor, how it's like what makes sense as a way for it to count or account for people's labor inputs. And he puts forth this idea that maybe not everybody's labor should count hour for hour the same, which is just almost just another way of kind of stating a real kind of just basic thing from the economy, which is not everybody gets paid the same wage. Not all jobs pay the same wage, but he has his kind of own way of getting into this and talking about it. And Matt, so I was hoping you're here if you have gotten your wits about you back from the radishes, and you want to kind of maybe give the breakdown of what Razeto's thing is here, and I'll actually put on the screen the article and the little chart so we can look at it while we're talking here. Let me do that.
Yeah, I think one line that stood out to me when I was translating it that I enjoyed was somewhere in that passage. He says, "Okay, but wait a minute, isn't this argument that I'm making really just a way to justify inequality among members that's not based on economic rationality, but just reflects power differences?" Like he's just basically like questioning, bringing this sort of fundamental question to himself about it. Like, is this just like some sort of rationalization of inequality? And obviously his answer is no. There's a very strong economic logic to this, which is about understanding and tracking value flows related to labor, and about the idea of that it's really a deeper idea of patronage, right? The idea is that your contributions and individuals' contributions to the cooperative need to be recognized and remunerated in some form in a way that is consistent with the principles of cooperativism and is logical with the economic system, with the way cooperatives function. And so his argument is that this is a way to do that the way that you go about this issue is by understanding that when people are contributing their labor, the labor that we do embodies not just sort of a kind of standard abstract labor, like all of us are working, but we do different things when we work, and the different things that we do can involve contributions of different factors. So I could bring a kind of administrative factor to it. I could bring a particular technical skill. I could bring whatever. Those are the things that need to be tracked and understood so that the business, the cooperative, operates rationally, operates kind of according to the economic rationality of a cooperative. And so just the last thing I'll say about this, the key thing is he really separates this from the way that the market does this. And he notes that in markets, there is all kinds of inequality.
Test 1 2 3.
In the setting of wage rates. So managers can get enormous
Test 1 2 3.
wage rates, and that's not because of
Test 1 2 3. Test 1 2 3.
That's not a logical remuneration of the factors they contribute. That's just a reflection of inequality.
Test 1 2 3.
So
right,
he is differentiating between sort of the market logic and the cooperative logic.
Right. And to kind of start off, because I am going to pose some criticisms, I guess, or some critiques or questions to this kind of perspective. But I'm hearing an echo. I think probably Matt, but so maybe mute yourself, Matt.
Yeah.
We'll see if I don't hear an echo. Okay, thank you. So this is an issue that actually came up recently, and somebody sent an email wondering about a particular article that we posted a gleaning to in our on the website in our newsletter, that was it was phrased as like a critique or something of media worker co-ops, and one of the big ones I took away and does is a legitimate valid issue for a lot of co-ops is the inability to retain talent, the right type of skills, people with the right types of skill sets, without paying commensurate to whatever is going on the on the rest of the market. And for certain skill sets, that can be a whole lot, and maybe more than a co-op can or feels like is actually justified. But nonetheless, and this is a big issue, especially with food co-ops. I know from talking to Jim and some other people that it's managing a grocery store and doing like the kind of top level stuff is apparently rather complicated, and there's it's a very particular set of skills and knowledge that people need to have to do that well, and there's not a whole lot of people who do that, much less who know about co-ops or into them. And while the big grocery chains may not pay their stockers and clerks very much, they pay their managers pretty well. So for food co-ops, it could kind of be like, wow, you're paying your manager so much more than your workers. Isn't that in violation of the cooperative spirit? Which, fair, right? But on the other hand, it can be a matter of just necessity to kind of have to have these pay differentials. So Razeto, though, besides, so he on the one hand he lays out the kind of philosophical reasoning, I guess, for it, for having weighting here, as we can see the different types of labor, right? So you have the different job functions, so 1 hour of just unskilled labor, which we've had a whole discussion about why I dislike this term. Nonetheless, the kind of basic labor gets remunerated as just hour for hour. If you're doing it requires a few more extra skills you had to gain, it's 1.25. If you're a technical specialist, it's 2.5 times. So 1 hour counts basically as 2.5 hours of simple labor. The question is how do you set these rates and these weights? And what he offers is kind of the standard economic answer to anything about how you set a price for something that is not easily, there isn't a market for, necessarily, which is you look at opportunity costs, like, okay, if you weren't doing this, what else could you be doing? And, how much would you be getting from that? So if you weren't working for the co-op, where else would you be working? What would your wage be there? Right. And so that foregone wage of working someplace else is the opportunity cost of working at the co-op. Of course, that's then offset by the benefit, the wage and everything else that goes along with it of working at the co-op. But, is kind of in the original analysis of like, okay, so you're starting a co-op, you're trying to figure out how to set your wage scale or your labor rate weights. His answer is you look at the opportunity costs that are set by the market. And that, of course, in itself is immediately problematic, because in the market, if we're, as you just, pointed out, and as he points out, wages are set on the basis of power differentials. So to me, like, it's on the one hand, I understand it, and I can understand that it's like, okay, well, you can't expect people to forego a whole bunch of salary just to work at the co-op. But on the other hand, there's something about, well, don't we want to, isn't there something about the co-op that's more than just a job? And are we willing, does that come with any value at all? Right. And of course, I don't think Razeto is even, suggesting that you just look at market wage rates and just apply them directly to your co-op, but that you take those as a starting place, right? And why, I could see that in practice working out in a way that I might be all right with, depending on how the conversations went and decisions that were made. Like for me, it's just a problematic place to start out with, because, okay, well, as whatever this particular type of, you're a computer programmer or whatever, you can, you work in a particular field where you can get an actually outsized salary, or someplace else, that, as compared to somebody who, is, working at what would be a minimum wage job someplace else, that differential, those opportunity costs have been set by the market, right? That we don't like. And so it's kind of, there is this problem for me, this conundrum. I think part of it is getting over the more kind of like getting a more solidaristic kind of attitude about things, so that we don't have to be constrained by the whatever market rates and the wage differentials that the market has decided on. So I'll stop there for now because I rambling a bunch. Matt, Chris, any thoughts? Colin?
Hey, it looks like my audio might be pretty, might not be working that well. So like you can hear me, but you can't hear it in the stream. But I just wanted to say that. So I might not speak as much until I verify that it's all good.
Okay. Well, Matt, it's all on you then.
Oh, yeah, this is all great. This is so interesting, and there's a lot of different issues in what you just raised. So I'm like, what's where would be a good thing to start with?
This is how I win arguments.
What's that?
I said, this is how I win arguments. You just throw out a whole bunch of stuff, and it's called a gish gap.
Use the person. So it's a couple of things. I think one thing that's interesting is as you said, Razeto, in a couple of, not only regards to the question of weighted pay, but in other issues too, like when you're starting the cooperative, he talks about using standard market rates as your kind of initial framework. When you're calculating how much you're going to pay for this or how much you're going to pay for that, or how do you account for this, you just kind of start with, well, here's what it is on the market right now. But then he goes into this whole process, like we're talking about assets and equity, right? Where over time, you actually, the co-op develops its own standard of equity that isn't based on the market. So that's a kind of interesting thing. In this one, he mentions this idea of the co-op developing its own standard. The other thing to note is here, his top consideration here is he wants percentages. He's looking at the weights. He's not looking for absolute pay rates. He's looking for percentages. And the reason is because this is about distribution of surplus. It's not about pay. It's not about wages or salary.
Right.
This is how do we distribute surplus? And so what's the rational basis for distributing surplus is what the question is.
Right. And I was definitely being sloppy with the language there. He is very clear that, and points this out, that we shouldn't think about it as wages at a worker co-op. It's a what's the term that he uses? It's an advance on expected surplus, future surplus. Right.
Yeah, like I think they call it anticipated distributions.
And anticipated, surplus distribution. Surplus.
But and that distinction is really important, because also just psychologically, in the standpoint of for a cooperative member, I've seen it where people come into it thinking of it as pay. This is my pay. This is my wage, my salary. And it's really misleading because it's like, no, this is the surplus, and we get to decide how much surplus to distribute. So we can set those rates at whatever rate we want to set them. Like it's a collective decision that gets made. So his question is kind of like, so it's a very political thing always. Like, what do you set the rate at? And I think it's political in cooperatives too. It's like it's a decision. In his other book, How to Create a Solidarity Enterprise, when he talks about this question about pay rates, he lays out three scenarios. One of them is this kind of weighted scenario, but another one is just, equal pay, just flat pay rate. And he puts it out there as like, you have to decide which of these things do you want to do? And he has an argument for why he thinks the economic dynamics are going to be thrown off if you just do a flat pay rate. But he recognizes it's a political decision. And I feel like in some co-ops, the solidarity that you get from a flat wage rate may be more important for the health and the kind of continuity, the existence of the co-op, than the economic rationality of paying, a weighted system. It just may be the weighted system is going to look too much like inequality to people, and it may undermine the co-op, right?
Right.
So I feel like it is fundamentally just a kind of political decision. One other thing I would note, one co-op here that I worked with, this landscaping co-op that I kind of advised them a little, was they had an interesting thing, which is they had a higher rate for stonework, not meaning masonry or skilled stonework, but moving stone, because picking up, loading, and moving stone is really physically difficult, and potentially you can get hurt, right? So they paid that at a higher rate.
Yeah.
So that valuation doesn't necessarily have to be set by the market. There's also a way in which the co-op itself can do that.
For sure.
Just one other thing to throw out there that should be noted that he doesn't, I think, do enough with: the C factor, the idea that you, like in this chart. Yeah, in these charts, he's looking at technical skill, these different things.
Exactly. That's exactly what I was going to say.
Oh, well, let's come back to that then in a minute.
No, go for it. No, I'm glad that, we're thinking the same way about this. Yeah, I mean, I looked at the list of functions, and while I was going to point out, he actually says in the paragraph up here, highlight it is, so in the process of establishing, these weights, the co-op could establish the valuations that the market habitually ignores. For example, contributions workers make to the societal integration of the group. That is the C factor, contributions which are undoubtedly of great importance and value in this type of enterprise. But then when we look down here, where is the C factor listed, right?
Right.
It's like, that's not a function, even though he just said it's incredibly valuable, which it is from anybody who has experience. Like, it's probably the most important. And and we had this at the worker co-op, former worker co-op that I helped some friends start, was, there was a guy there who was, the peacemaker. And he was the, like, I can, could listen to anybody's stuff and was really like serve that. And he didn't do like the complicated stuff. He did all the basic, what would be like basic, simple labor here. But like, he served that particular purpose in the group dynamic that was super important. But it's like, we can say, so somebody who's a bookkeeper or something, you say like, well, what did you do to get those skills? And they say like, well, I went to this school and I did this and I took that certification. You say like, well, what, my friend, I'll call him John. John, what did you do to get your skills? Like, well, let's see. I had an incredibly like abusive upbringing and made me like very observant of people. And then I had to go through a bunch of like dealing with my own stuff. And that made me very like empathetic. And now it's like, how do you value that? It's like, it's like I've been working on it for like, 35 years. And it's like, but that doesn't even make the list, even for somebody like Razeto, who's thinking terms already. When he actually gets to putting numbers down, that goes out the window. And I think one of the big reasons, and this is kind of maybe a trap of him trying to work within the economics paradigm, is that anything that cannot be quantified is devalued by default. If it's easily quantifiable, that gets a value put on it, right? It gets a dollar sign put on it. And things that are you can't really put a dollar sign on, they just zero. They just kind of get a zero by default, right? And and so I mean, I think that he's right. That kind of problem it runs into, because it's like a lot of these soft skills or things that the care work, as the feminist economists would have it, this kind of things. It's
Yeah.
not easy to put a value on it, or like it's not like so simple as like, okay, you paid how much to get your degree. These are very different kinds of things, and that I think definitely need to be worked in. And I don't know if this kind of you know system is a good way to do that or not. I mean, you've mentioned that this is something that the distributed cooperatives have worked on. I don't know if you want to comment on how they've worked that in, if you have any
Yeah,
insight.
I mean, it's a really interesting. It's an interesting question. I don't know if it's the same process ultimately or a different process, but it's also, I mean, it is still a distribution of surplus question. But what the disco folks do when they organize the distribution of the surplus is they say, we're going to distribute some of it for your livelihood work, which is the work that brings in revenue. And so all of these things on the chart would apply to livelihood work. Those are all sort of livelihood work things, right?
Mm-hmm.
Although some of those things, administrative work and some of these other things, are not actually bringing in revenue, right? Those are just overhead, as they say. Those are costs to the cooperative that nobody's paying you to do that. Like, you just have to pay for it out of the revenue that you're getting from the actual work you do, right? So there is already a distinction there. But in the discos, it's just that when you distribute surplus, you distribute it for the livelihood work that brings in the money. For the care work, which is a pretty broad category, it can mean care in the more specific interpersonal, taking care of each other sense. It can mean a kind of broader sense of, like, I think, for example, some overhead work or administrative work or even so-called management work could conceivably be thought of as care work.
For sure.
The person who facilitates the regular meetings of the co-op members and makes those be productive and healthy meetings is, that seems a lot like care work to me. But they have like this bucket of money that comes in from livelihood work. Some of it goes to livelihood. Some of it goes to a bucket for care. So the hours you spent during care work get paid. And then some of it goes to love work, which is the solidarity or pro bono work or the contributions to the commons that the co-op does. So, like the landscaping co-op that I mentioned, Organic Gardens, like their solidarity, their love work was, for example, tabling at a farmer's market in support of a political cause, like not promoting themselves, but doing work that was kind of in the general idea of promoting permaculture, for example. That would be for them important work to support. So that method, that's another way to think about the distribution. It seems to me it's not exactly the same as what Razeto is doing here. It's not contradictory.
Right.
So the two things could be integrated.
Yeah. No. And
I don't think. Well, I would say I think that stuff goes out the window. Is a little too strongly put. I think the point here is that what Razeto is trying to do is just is come up with, like, here's how you could create this weighting system. And I don't think he's intending this is the exhaustive thing and how it's going to be done. This is just more like, I need to establish that you could have a weighting system and it would make sense.
Right.
But I do think it's a weakness. Like, it would have been better if he address the question of how do the C factor things get counted in that. And you could, I'm not sure you couldn't put dollar signs on those things, right? I mean,
Oh yeah, yeah. No, I was
HR
gonna.
people get paid for the corrupt, rotten version of care work that they do. You know,
Sure.
I mean, it's like,
Yeah, you could say like, okay, John, you spent an hour after the meeting, after that rough meeting, patching things up with everybody and getting everybody to feel okay. All right, and your labor doing care work, is weighted at 5.5
yeah.
or whatever.
Oh, I mean, yeah, there are ways you could apply that. But I did feel, when I was reading it, I had the same reaction that you did. I was just kind of like, well, wait a minute. Why you just said this great thing about we can have other standards. We can have other criteria here, and then you make a chart and they're not in there. Like, that's frustrating.
Yeah.
It would be nice to see that.
Um, but my only other, critique, and it's not really a critique so much because, as you said, Roseto's offering this as an example of like a proof of concept, kind of like you could do this. Um, and I'm sure he is not, set on any of the particular numbers involved. I still, however, think it's interesting looking at the numbers that he chose, just like looking at the, particular list of skills that he chose and didn't choose. So I did just want to take a look at this. And okay, close that. Yes. So the weights that he comes up with, range from 1 to 7.5, which in my understanding, I mean, it was, so that's, basically a pay differential between the highest and lowest paid employee of 7.5, which sounds pretty good. And I remember reading years ago an interview with a large worker co-op in the US and with the CEO, and they were, kind of bragging about the fact they only got paid 10 times as much as the lowest paid member. So, 7.5, and that's, I'm sure Mondragon, I think, is around there for many other co-ops, for that kind of pay differential. And it looks pretty good, of course, in comparison to the, traditional economy where we have, large corporations with pay differentials of 360, 400 to 1 or whatever. Still, this is something and where I, maybe just have a fundamental disagreement with, with a lot of people, or there's just, not any, we just look at things differently. But to me, still, even this rate of 1 to 7.5 is not like, it's not rational. It's not logical. Because like, I think about what does it mean? Well, so one thing I'll say, and this is just funny, right? So Louis Razeto Migliaro wrote this book, and his hypothetical worker who gets paid the most in this co-op is Louis M. I'm just saying. I thought it was funny. So at any rate, Louis M in this example makes 7.5 times what Pedro and Juan make. So I read that as saying like, so Louis can just come in on Monday, right? And then not come in for like a week and a half, right? The rest of that work week, and then like half of the next work week, come in for like half a day on Wednesday, and will get paid the same as Pedro and Juan working like 5 days a week, right? So if Pedro works 7.5 days, like full days, which is 2.5 or a week and a half of like a work week, 1.5 work weeks, he gets paid the same as Louis working 1 day, right? Which to me does not connect. Like, I have a really hard time buying that okay, if we're both going to work 40 hours a week and you just get paid 7.5 times what I make, okay, that maybe sounds reasonable. But when I kind of switch the way I think about it around, like, wait a minute, that means I, like, literally you could make the same thing I make with only working 1 day every week and a half. Like, that doesn't sound right. So like to me, I think like maybe 1.85, 1.25, 1.5. I think like our maximum pay differentials reasonably, like in a philosophically defensible way, would definitely not get above like 1 to 2 or 1 to 3, maybe. I don't know. You could make an argument, but when it starts getting up to like this, to me, I think like it's inconceivable that somebody can create as much value in a single day at work as somebody else in a week and a half, you know?
This is okay. So, right. So one thing I
Then
think the
maybe it's just disagrees.
last thing you said is helpful, I think, is that it's thinking about it in terms of creating value as opposed to pay rates. If you think about it as pay rates, it just really locks you into this idea of wage rates of what we're getting paid. And those we know are based on capitalist exploitation. Like the reason the pay rates for workers are what they are is to generate surplus value, right? Like that's the whole point. Whereas in the co-op, everything belongs to all the workers, right? So in that sense, that dynamic is kind of off the table. So the question here is, what are people bringing to the process? And then the question just becomes, is it conceivable that somebody, so like the farm where I was working today, the farmer, is she bringing 7.5 times as much to the process of what we were doing today? Like we were, most of the time, she was harvesting, I was harvesting. Her harvesting skills, I would put at certainly twice as good as mine or 3 times as good as mine. She just has more skill and she knows how to harvest more plants and she does it better. So she brings that skill to it. So you could make an argument that like there's at that level. But then while she's there doing all this, she's simultaneously running through her head the numbers, who needs to get what stuff needs to be packaged in what way in order to go to this person. She's doing a tremendous amount of administrative labor while she's in the field with me that I'm completely not doing. And if you took me out of that picture, it would not have anywhere near the impact on the farm and its production. If you took her out, the thing collapses. So there's something that in that sense, I feel like it's rational to see that and to recognize that and to recognize that the production process that we're involved in has those differences and that they're very meaningful and that therefore and that they should, in his framework, you should pay for the factors of production that are involved. Like you should value them, right? You recognize the value flows. Where does the money come? Where does the value come from? And do something to maintain it and sustain it. So that's the framework of this. So to me, it's like, if you think of it as pay rates and pay rate differentials, then personally, I'm kind of like, I think a flat rate is the way to go. I just don't, and so like Sustainable Economies Law Center, flat pay rate. You can be a lawyer, you can be someone sweeping up the office of your first day at work answering phones. It doesn't matter. You just do a flat pay rate. That's a political decision that I think that I'm pretty sympathetic to. But is it rational? Like, I don't know that that's particularly.
And before we decide if it's rational or not, Chris, or do you want to chime in on that?
Yeah, I had something to say, but Colin, are you with us? Did you have anything you wanted to say?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
All right. I didn't have a comment or statement necessarily, but I just kind of wanted to follow up about the last question. You said, "What is rational here in this instance? How are we defining rationality? Just in purely economic terms?" I kind of want to know more about that.
Right. And I mean, and that's the question. And for me, I think it should be a real site of struggle for us, or like, something that we spend a lot of time like thinking about, and not just taking easy answers, because on the one hand, it is totally rational if you're trying to have a business and you need somebody with a particular skill set, and they require that you pay them a certain amount, or that they get paid more than other people doing different tasks, and then it's rational, I would say, even for the other members who are going to be making less, is like, well, yeah, let's hire this guy so the whole thing can work, or gal, as the case may be. But on the other hand, if we're like, to my mind at least, why I'm in the whole cooperative movement is because I think we need to fundamentally change the premises that our economy is built on, and that worker co-ops offer a great place for that to happen. It doesn't necessarily have to happen. There are plenty of worker co-ops that don't struggle with these questions at all. But that's I think what we're trying to get at with like this, and what Razeto is trying to get at with bringing the C factor into it, at least recognizing that besides these hard skills, there's also things like trust and community spirit that are important and valuable, and making sure they get valued. I think one of the problems that we get trapped in when we're talking about what's rational or what's logical is that remuneration is monetary. Like when we think of what you're getting paid, what you're getting from a job, it's how much you're getting paid, like the paycheck, the money, and then what's the monetary value of your benefits, of your like health plan or whatever else that you get, and your paid days off, if any. So because we think in these terms that all remuneration is monetary, therefore if somebody has additional skills and we feel like they need to be remunerated for providing those for us, it automatically translates to a higher rate of pay. And for me, I think, and not saying that I have necessarily answers to the questions, but I think we should at least be asking these questions like, there's other forms of remuneration. Obviously, in working in a worker co-op, you have control over, more control than you would in any other job over the conditions of your labor. You have a democratic voice. You share in the profits of the business, and so those are all benefits. Some monetary, some not. Mostly not. And I would say for me. And while I have not been a member of a worker co-op, just the experience of working in GEO, it's invaluable. It's like the old MasterCard commercials, like it's priceless, right? Like, okay, your pay rate $20 an hour, your health insurance plan is worth $15,000 a year, but actually feeling like a respected human being in your workplace, priceless. Like you can take a whole lot of that, the salary and the other stuff away, for some of us anyway, and maybe it depends on how much that's affected you negatively in the traditional economy, as to how much you value it. But at any rate, I want, like, part of me just wants to say to folks who are like, okay, I have all these, I have these skills or whatever, I could get remunerated this much if I go work for Google or whoever. I want to say to them, like, okay, well then go work for Google, right? If that's what you're in it for, like, but if you're in it for something more, that's more than just monetary reward, right? As long as we're getting our needs met, like, I always want us to be, reaching for something more than just thinking in the same old monetary terms. And I think that's kind of the trap that anybody who tries to think in terms of economics it's really hard not to fall into. And I did a bachelor's degree in economics, and I there's a lot of my like thesis, my undergrad thesis was about this, and how in trying to value things that are necessarily, you cannot put a dollar value on. You cannot put a dollar value on somebody's life. And yet we do all the time. You cannot put a dollar value on an unpolluted stream or landscape or ecosystem. And yet we totally do. We have a process for figuring out how much it's worth that this stream not get polluted, or how much, it's like, they literally like go out and survey people. It is completely ridiculous, but we do it nonetheless. And so what I think we really need sorry to ramble, is just like a revaluation of our values. Like we need to really think about, like, on a personal level. I think partially we just got to break out of the how we're so conditioned to think about things, and do start thinking about things in terms of needs, like real needs, and equity, more than how much than opportunity costs and stuff like that. So
So I didn't know we were gonna talk about this. So I've been just trying to figure out what we are talking about. But so the C factor, does that include the the fact that I saved someone's life like 3 weeks ago? I'm like the person who knows least on the job. They know the most, and I saved their life. Um, I mean, the process would have grounded to a halt if they died. Um, there's this one job I worked at Toyota. Um, if you flip a truck over, we're doing this thing where you're like high risk of flipping a truck over, and then that's like your job. You get fired if you flip a truck over and destroy it. And I kept being the one that's like, you're gonna flip that truck over, because for whatever reason we're all sleep deprived, working overnight and stuff. And at a certain point, when I left that job, I was like, I'm so glad I'm not that person anymore who's saving other people's jobs. Is that the C factor?
you want to comment on that, Matt? That it's, I mean, community is, but although he was writing in Spanish, so I don't know what the C actually stands for.
So the C, the reason it's the C factor, his spiel is, in economics, you often do P or K for profit, you do W for wages, there's this shorthand, right? And so he's like, in his research, he found out that, like, wait a minute, there's this other thing that's happening that explains why these firms that are short on these other factors are actually succeeding. These cooperatives are being successful. And he's like, what is the explanation? So it turns out that, in his argument, that there are all these unrecognized forms of solidarity and care and compassion. So that's why it's a C, because it's all these C words, like compassion and care and comradeship and collaboration and communication, all these C words. And those things are hugely important for the productivity of any company, which is why capitalist companies spend so much time on supervision and HR and all this stuff trying to manipulate people to try to take advantage of the C factor. But they're really bad at it because they're simultaneously exploiting people and maintaining inequality. So that really undermines solidarity in a huge way. So they struggle and they don't do a good job, right? They say we're a family, but nobody believes it. But in co-ops, that C factor thing is actually the key to their success. Like, it's fundamental. So you have to cultivate it and work on it and be conscious of it and understand the value of it. So that's where the thing comes from. So it's a great example. Like, all what you're doing, all that sort of caring for people, paying attention, communicating with people, coordinating with people such that this shit doesn't happen, is a great example of a sort of very, very practical level workplace C factor functioning. If you didn't do that, what would happen? Right? Trucks would flip over and God knows what happened. People get hurt, trucks get damaged, etc.
Yeah. I mean, I didn't care about the trucks. Well, offline I'll say some interesting stuff. But but yeah, when I thought about it, like, I hated being it wasn't assigned to me. I just did it because I knew. And when it came to the people, and I guess I think of them right now, yeah, I didn't care about the trucks, but I recognize them as fellow human beings, and I knew an idea of what they're struggling with.
Right.
And I was just being compassionate. It's like, wow, watch out. But I'm glad that that I now know that term, though. I think that's a very useful term to be aware of.
It's true. I think it's huge. That has a huge impact. The other thing I think about this question of rationality, the reason that I think this book is so interesting is because what he's doing is he's saying, Razeto is saying, economic rationality is not the same thing as capitalist economic rationality. And when we talk about co-ops, we often use all the frameworks of capitalist economics, and we end up using capitalist economic rationality and then trying to make sense of cooperatives. And it doesn't add up, because there are things like this C factor stuff that are important in cooperatives in a way they aren't in capitalist companies. And so you're not going to understand or value the process the way you should, because you're using these capitalist concepts, right? So like in this case, the economics of cooperatives and other worker-run organizations, for example, worker self-organized firms, is solidarity and labor are at the center of the firm. Capital is not at the center. The priority is labor. All of these things that you're doing when you think about pay rates or weighting the different factors or tracking the value flows, that's all about building labor and enhancing labor. It's not about building capital. And so the logic is very, in some cases, really different. But the book is cooperative enterprise and market economy. So his big question is, how do these two things, how do cooperatives function in relationship to market economies? So he can't just sort of get away from these factors. So it's true, like, in Mondragon, I think they abuse this concept of, if we didn't pay people this much, they'd go off to such and such other company.
And I always want, who are these people? Like, give me some names. Let's go have a conversation.
You can. I mean, basically,
general terms.
You go to, yeah, in Mondragon, if you go to the executive offices of almost any of the co-ops, those are the people there. It's listed on the websites. They're not usually workers from the company. They're usually people hired from outside, or often. I don't know if I'd say usually. But the other thing that they miss out on that's really disappointing is Arismendi Razeto at Mondragon had a really key concept where he said you have to socialize knowledge to democratize power. So in the workplace, it's not good enough to have a setting where, this person has all these skills and all this capacity, we'll pay them this, way more. If that's your situation, then distribute those skills. Like, don't let that centralization of skill happen. That's a very typical capitalist kind of structure, right? You don't have to do that. So that's a really, I think, crucial way to get at this issue is to think about, how do we democratize, how do we socialize knowledge in the workplace? How do we build up our capacity to do more things?
Mm-hmm.
There was one other thing I wanted to say, though, Josh, that's interesting. In my landscaping work that I'm doing right now, I've done 2 different formats. The way I got started with it, just a co-worker in the buyers club. I work with her in the buyers club. She's like, hey, do you want to help me do this work? I'm like, sure. So I come in, I start working side by side with her. We're getting paid the same rate, $30 an hour. It's all totally collaborative. She's not my boss. I'm not her employee. It's all it's just great. And the process is like way more fulfilling, right? Another person who is also, a good person in the food system here and all, but runs a landscaping business, also needed help. So I did a little bit of work for them, and it was $20 an hour because I'm low skilled. So suddenly here I am at $20 an hour low skilled, and it was managed. It was like somebody who, there was a definite hierarchy. Mm-hmm. And so there was pressure. There was like speed pressure. Like, we have to get we're in a hurry. We got to get this done before this time. All that kind of stuff. So I did it only for like 2 weeks, and then I was like, this is just not for me.
Yeah, the pay is worse and the conditions are worse.
But the point is that the more cooperative version paid better.
Yeah.
It's not only that the idea that, I think one of the things Razeto wants to challenge is like this idea that if you go the capitalist route, you'll get more money, but you have to deal with all this bullshit. But it's like, no, not necessarily. If you go the cooperative route, you actually may get more money and have all the control and sort of fulfillment that you get.
Yeah.
So it's interesting.
Yeah. So yeah, and Go
Sorry,
ahead, Chris.
Matt. When you said earlier about going to like Mondragon websites or something and looking at like
Yeah.
executives or something, were you suggesting that there's a fraction of workers in Mondragon that they're lured there because of like higher pay? Um,
Yeah, the top
manage-
management is recruited often from other management jobs in private companies. They're not necessarily co-op people at all. They're just business people who know how to run, because Mondragon has got some seriously big and very kind of in their sectors, very leading kind of enterprises, right?
mhm.
So they're up against, other auto parts manufacturers or whatever. And
There,
they want a manager who knows how to run like one of these high level, super competitive auto parts manufacturing things. So that's their argument. So it's a legitimate point, right? Like you have to think about that. But it does lead to this situation where you do end up with a management class in a sense, right?
well,
Yeah.
well, to me, I mean, the word management is not inherently bad. It just depends on what type of what are the real dynamics.
Yeah.
Anyways, go ahead. Oh, the Colin, did you have anything that you wanted to say?
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay. Um, I just wanted to say, like, I appreciate the framework they're talking about the C value, because this is something that I kind of, intuited, in a sense, like, but nobody really talks about these things about the C value or about other ways to value work and labor. But I'm thinking about this job I used to have that was um, I had a boss that was like messaging me one day, and she was trying to get me primed on some sort of like work trip that we're going on, like just talking about logistics and stuff. And she sends me off with this message about like, oh, make sure when you get there that you're contributing, that you're adding value to the team. And I didn't really know what to make of that. I thought it was just kind of like a very interesting statement. And now I'm like thinking back on that and thinking like, was she saying I needed to be more of a team player in the sense of just like adding economic value or more C value? It just seemed like a very strange statement. But anyway, I think people don't really talk about these kind of things in the workplace, where I feel like value is mainly a shorthand for, yeah, just like make sure you're, you know, creating more surplus value or creating more whatever. It's usually not C value. So um, yeah, I just wanted to say I appreciate this conversation.
Yeah, and the C factor stuff. Also, is kind of a related point to Matt. Talking about the wages aren't necessarily lower just because you're in a co-op. Just because you're kind of focusing on the C factor, or C factors, doesn't mean that you're going to have lower profits. It might mean you might have more, because one of the most expensive things to do for any business is retrain people, have to replace people. The training process is always a drag and a money loser for you. And, it just takes time. And so keeping people around is, profitable. It makes a lot of business sense, just dollars and cents sense. And so, having care and compassion in your workplace, not some namby-pamby hippie BS, right? It's like, no, it also is going to have financial repercussions. Um, yeah. So, yeah, I mean, there's definitely a whole lot to unpack with all this stuff. But like I said, I think the major thing is just really having, conversations, at least getting people started thinking about it. And like, even if I don't necessarily, not going to jump on board super enthusiastically with every single thing Razeto has in this book, at the very least, like, what is so impressive to me about it is just the idea of like, okay, let's start building an economic theory from the ground up, not on the basis of capitalist rationality, but on the basis of a labor worker, less human, a more human, kind of
Mm.
rationale, and seeing where that, takes us, which is, like I said, as a disgruntled former, economics student, that is something I really appreciate. So,
Have y'all ever heard of the book or read it? It's called I think it's called Drive: The Surprising Truth About What Motivates Us.
no, is that Kahneman maybe, or is that, or
I forgot the author, but
look it up?
yeah, and man, I haven't read it in a long time, but and that might be part of those of the conversation. I think one part of it, I think they talk about money. They're like, well, money. There's a limit. I think I forgot. Like at that time, I think the limit was like 65 grand or something. Like I think, but it wasn't that high. There's like this amount where, well, to a lot of people that's really high, but there's this amount to where like people you can't lure them to do a job. They're not gonna do it. Another one was like meaning, if it's meaningful. Another is voluntarism, uh, like if it comes from inner drive, like something they want to do. Another I think is people have control of their environment, and like the context in which they're working. Um, I think another one was working teamwork, but I think working with people you choose. I think that's another one. I don't know. I think that was an interesting book. I don't know if it's like uh, it was supposed to be research based, but that's always kind of like a coin toss about
Right.
if there's
Yeah,
fraud
I
or
mean,
anything involved.
yeah, it's got a Malcolm Gladwell quote on the cover, so take that how you will. But yeah, Daniel Pink. But I mean, that's, yeah, not surprising at all. Yeah, I definitely have seen those studies, and I think they've done them pretty regular, about like happiness, and like, how much it, you know money do you need to be happy, or at what point does it stop making you happy? And yeah, it's always around the median income, for your place. If you're not, you know too far down, you have all your needs met, you're not worried, about things financially. After that, like, it doesn't really make any difference, because fundamentally those are not the things that
Mm.
trouble us as humans on this planet. It's things like relationships and mortality and meaning. It's that stuff, and no amount of money helps you with that. Which, for evidence of this fact, you can just look at, like, I don't know, maybe the Titan sub, and imagine that all those people with all that money on there were so like had felt the need to like do something like that to like get a thrill or something. Like, these people are not happy, a lot of them. That's what I'm saying. Like, and it's not even, you don't even need to look at millionaires or multimillionaires, but you can, I'm sure, see it in your own. I've seen it in my own life, and of people who at one point didn't have very much money and they were miserable, and then they had way more money and still miserable. you know if if the cause of their misery was like, okay, I didn't have enough money, but generally that's not really the problem for a lot of us. Although, not to downplay that problem, certainly is. But yeah, there's a lot of things that motivate us, and that was what I quipped at a GEO meeting a while back, that I was reading this book. I'm sitting around here. I never finished it. I never finished this book because I got so frustrated. Um, let's see, is the camera going to pick up worker participation? All right, it's not. Worker Participation: Lessons from the Worker Co-ops of the Pacific Northwest by John Pencavel, which does have some really cool stuff about the tree planting and plywood worker co-ops from the 70s and 80s in there, but is also written for economists. And so he feels the need to like kind of address like the standard economic things, which, as reading this book, it made me realize that to be an economist, you have to pretend like you don't understand how people work, like, at all. Like, you have no idea how human beings are, because one of the critiques from economists that he addresses in this book is like, well, But I mean, how can that work if you're a worker and an owner? Don't you just want to pay yourself as little as possible? And it's only like, and they can't understand it because they're only thinking about motivation in terms of money, right? And they don't understand that people do things for other reasons apart from money, and do most things, right? So it's like you have to understand, or you have to pretend as an economist that like you don't understand things like just love or commitment or like a sense of justice or any of that stuff, like which in our real lives we all know those are all very powerful things, like hugely powerful. And so, yeah, I don't know where this rant came from or where it's going, but yes, obviously. Sounds like a good
It's
book.
it's funny in cooperatives at work we mentioned this guy Alfonso Vasquez, who is a Spanish, I guess, management theorist, but he had a really nice little essay about phases of participation in a workplace, and he's like most of the conversation about worker participation is about worker participation in the, what's the term he uses, in operations, in the doing of the work. So lots of theory about worker participation in the doing of the work, but the planning of the work, or even the why are we even doing this work in the first place discussions, workers have nothing to do with that, right? So the participation is not participation in the whole process, just in this one moment when it's performing the task. Sometimes there's a little bit of participation in the product in the sense of like profit sharing or something, or you'll get better wages if our company's successful. But there's no like participation in real evaluation or assessment. Like, are we doing the right thing? Are we going the right direction? Should we make strategic changes? So participation is usually really limited to that point of operations, and then the motivation is only about that. How do we get people to work really hard in this one phase while excluding them from all the others? That's kind of what the thing is. One thing I like that Razeto does, maybe I should point it out more in like one of the chapter introductions or something, is he really dislikes this worker owner term, because he's like, this is confusion. It's like, this does not help us understand anything. This makes it sound like people have two different brains operating at the same time, and they're not consistent. Like workers who want to exploit themselves like crazy on the one hand, and then workers on the other hand who want to get paid as much as possible and not have to work very hard. And it's like, that's just capitalist thinking being applied. So,
someone made a point to me. They're like, does that mean it's someone who owns a worker?
Worker owner, yeah, it does sound a little bad.
Hilarious, right?
Hey, but Colin, how much more time do you have? Do we have time to talk about the battery co-op thing? You're muted, Colin. Sorry.
Yeah, that's okay. I could probably hang out for another 10, 15 minutes, so yeah, that would be good, if possible.
Sure. I mean, I don't know that I or anybody here knows necessarily any more about the battery cooperative than is in the article. But if you had some questions or thoughts about it you wanted to share, we can.
Yeah. I didn't have a ton of questions, but I just wanted to say I think it's an amazing.
Yeah.
Sure. I think it's a great idea to organize people around, like this idea of creating sort of DIY generators, DIY batteries, because I think, in my experience, people from all walks of life, demographics, political affiliation, they all don't trust, investor-owned utilities. They all have gripes with them, personal and like political. So, yeah, I think it's a great idea to organize people around trying to stem the tide of the disasters that are, being generated by these utility companies. So, first off, I wanted to say that I think it's a great idea to get people in the door, get people talking about how do we organize and how do we imagine like an alternative. I think that's awesome. And then I think it's awesome the way that in this article they talk not as much about the actual like building of the batteries, the building of the generators and how that goes about. It's more just about like how do we understand this community and this sort of this governance structure as a technology itself. They kind of break down like how do we look at that as the technology? How do we refine that? And they talk about like the fact that they, this particular collective, they do things such as um, take like seasonal breaks. So like during the winter or the fall, they'll kind of slow down a little bit. They'll stop and they kind of take a break. And then in the summertime, when there's more of a need for these batteries and these generators, they get going again and they start doing actions and they start getting more active. And how that sort of seasonality is kind of their experience as workers, like in this economy, is kind of counter to their intuition, because it's always the fact that they need to keep working, keep generating income, keep producing. But in this sort of collective, they want to take the chance to experiment and see what it's like to take breaks and to experiment with like I said, production cycles and governance structures, that sort of thing. So yeah, I think that those were kind of my major thoughts. I think it's super cool. I'm actually going to sign up to take there's a course. They said that in the article there's some sort of course that you'll get more sort of info on, like how to start your own and how to build it, kind of thing. So I'm super excited about this idea.
Nice. Yeah, I mean, this is another one of those situations where, there's the silver lining to the disasters, and fortunately, we do seem to be very cooperative creatures, because when the chips are down, we don't end up with Mad Max scenarios, barely at all. It's quite the opposite, and and it's nice to see it when it can turn into something, beyond just the immediate response, to an emergency. And I really, like the fact that they're, focusing on the organizing aspects as, the more important part of the technology. I really, because that is, the material technology is what it is. You can always, do some web searches and go to the library and figure that stuff out, but this other type of technology is not nearly so well understood or available. So, and I was looking here, I don't know where they mentioned the thing, but or the course.
Yeah, it's towards the top.
Oh, okay. Well,
probably. That might have been on the shareable article.
Yeah. So, as we said, cross-posted from Shareable. Our good friends. So
it seems to me that one of the dangers of disaster scenarios, not really the Mad Max stuff, is just the isolation thing, like how so much damage can be wrought. And people are just isolated, they're not aware of it. I think like in Chicago, I think when there's this deadly heat wave, and the people who were more at risk of dying and who died were people who they're elderly people who live by themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And then that's stuff like that, I think. So I think that's why that's one reason why I try to connect with people a little bit more, to be more prepared for these situations where we have, like, I know fireplaces I can go to, because I don't use my chimney and furnace or whatever. It's like the way that the house was built afterwards, it's just not really viable to use. But we have a monopoly over here in Chicago. I believe it's Commonwealth Edison, ComEd. There's quite a few monopolies here, it feels like. Do y'all got those energy monopolies?
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, for power distribution, it's kind of, you're basically stuck with a monopoly, because you're not going to have 15 different power lines coming to your house so you can choose who you want to get power from. The standard, usually, hopefully, it's a well-regulated monopoly. That's the goal. And we had that in Montana forever, and it actually worked really well. And we had super cheap power and provided lots of good jobs and good retirement benefits for a lot of people for a long time. And they deregulated, sold off the dams to one Pennsylvania Power and Light, sold off uh, the lines to Northwestern, and promised us cheaper energy rates, which we got the opposite. Anyway, that's a complete tangent. But on the the connections thing, I'll just share kind of a sad story actually. But since we brought it up, I had been posting back when the Texas snowstorm, the winter storm happened, and all their power went out. Posted an article, at least one, about a mutual aid effort down there, maybe a couple, and I'm sure a couple, like in Facebook, to post to Facebook pages and stuff. And then I got an email, or GEO got an email, like wanting more information, and from a woman saying, I'm in Texas and I'm, you know, having problems connecting with these services, and I keep reading about these mutual aid efforts, and please, do you have any idea how, help me get in touch with them? So I called her and talked to her, and just, I was unfortunately unable to tell her anything she didn't already know, just from doing web searches. I'm in Montana. I'm not, I don't know anybody down there really. But tried to help as best I could. But what she said, well, one, it became clear that despite all of the massive mutual aid efforts that were going on, it wasn't nearly enough, right? There were lots of people who were not getting reached, even if they were going out specifically looking. But the other thing was that she said, of all the places that I've contacted, you're the only one who got a hold of me, right? Like, it's just like I left messages like 15 different places, and it's just nothing. And so me, like some random guy from Montana, like calls back and is like, "Oh my God, are you okay? I don't know what you can do. Let's try to help." It's just, and so yeah, that, like, I don't know what the point of that story is, but like we're lacking in connections, and it's not, yeah, and the building connections with our communities, which I can't even contemplate in a place like Chicago, frankly, living as I do in a town of like 600 people, what connecting with your community might mean there. But definitely with the neighborhood. So,
this example also makes me, not your example, but the one of the battery collective thing, makes me think of the it's a different approach, but it's a similar concept, which is, the Earth Worker Cooperative in Australia organized to, they created a worker cooperative to create solar powered water heaters. And the logic of it was, we don't have time to wait. We can't go for trying to change government policy in order to therefore somehow promote the use of, they're like, we just need to start building the technology we need right now and doing it, because the transition has to happen now. And it's so I think there's something really great about that kind of like, we're going to respond to this problem immediately on the basis of what we can muster. In their case, they had a lot of labor movement connections and environmental movement connections, so they could leverage some like big organizations and some sources of money, and also a lot of manufacturing skill. But I just feel like there's this kind of like, take this direct action approach to changing the power system is pretty fundamental.
Yeah.
More inspiring. It feels very inspiring.
Yeah. Well, we've been going at it for an hour 20, and I've got a cat staring at me demanding dinner. So maybe
first things first.
Yeah. Does anybody have any final words or thoughts?
Oh, did you want to do the fuck up Monday, or is
Oh,
that too long?
yeah, no, I want to wait until Audra is here because she always
Okay.
asks me about this. Says I should give the lessons learned, all the lessons learned from
Okay.
the kombucha co-op. So, but we'll do that next time maybe.
Oh, I love it. Yeah, cool. Totally down for the fuck up sessions.
Yeah.
All about that.
All right. Well, with that, we'll hit the button and call that a stream.
Cool.
All right.
Bye bye.
I guess nice talking to you.